Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read during the month of June. During the month of June, I decided to read mostly books by trans authors. I also participated in a number of readathons, including BookstagramPride, which I co-hosted along with a number of people on Instagram who I'll link below, and I also participated in Read It Queer. I also did a number of readathons that only lasted for part of the month. From May 31st to June 6th, I participated in the Queer Lit Readathon. From the 8th to the 14th, I participated in Read Your Gaze. Then there was a 24-hour queer readathon that was going on Instagram on the 11th. The 48-hour queer Juneteenth edition of Blackathon also went on this month from June 19th to 20th. And then from June 24th to June 30th, there was the 24 and 7 that was going on Instagram. So the last three of those did not have any prompts associated with them. It was basically read as much queer stuff as you can, or read as much queer stuff by people of color as you can. But the rest of them do have prompts associated with them. So for ease of discussion, I'm going to be talking about the books, and I will have the prompts that they fulfill in the description below. I've already tried to film this once, and talking about every single one of those on every single book was just incredibly clunky. So we're gonna do it this way. And in the future, I'm probably going to restrain myself and only do a couple of readathons a month. We'll see how that goes. So the first book I finished in the month of June was Queer Heartache by Kit Yan. This is actually a reread. This is a poetry collection that focuses on Kit Yan's experience as a trans, queer, Asian American person. There are some poems that talk about his childhood, while others talk about sex and sexuality. I had actually gotten a chance to see Kit Yan perform several years ago. This is actually where I got their book. So it was a really cool to be able to reread it and hear their voice in my head and kind of see some of the stuff from memory of what he was doing during some of the poems. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I will say though, if you are looking for something that's a little bit more family friendly, this is maybe not the area. One of the things that he hits on is sex and sexuality. So there is some stuff that's a little bit more explicit in some of the poems. But like I said, he hits on multiple themes, so the whole book isn't necessarily about that. And of course, whenever I read poetry books, I have a hard time not picking out 1 or 20 quotes that I want to read. So I'm going to read out a part of one of their poems called Hello, My Gender Is. As if sexuality and gender were something that you could purchase on impulse, pulling up to the register and carefully picking out gay, straight, man, or woman, neatly packaged for easy consumption, then you should be able to do it with ease, purchasing a gold-foiled bar of gay and a plastic bag of man, and walking out of the grocery store fabulously into the set of Queer Eye. But it's not that easy, because sometimes my gender is boy who looks like a girl who likes boys, and sometimes my gender is trans, and sometimes my gender is chillin' out in between. But most of the time, my gender is fuck you, mind your own business. And then throughout the rest of the poem, he goes on and names kind of a number of different sexualities, gender, and gender expressions, and talks about colonization. So that is Kit Yan. I had a wonderful time rereading this. The next book I read was Our Dreams at Dusk, Volume 3 by Yuhki Kamatani. This is a series that revolves around an LGBT drop-in center. The first book focused on one boy who was outed and eventually finds the center and starts meeting the different people who were in the center. And the books after that kind of focus on these different people, but you sort of get it from his perspective. So this book focuses on one of his classmates who comes to the center to help work on things because his dad is hired by the center to help them build things. But he's very homophobic, but it seems like he's maybe in the closet and homophobic because of that. You also get to hear more about one of the characters who's frequently at the center, who is trans. I enjoyed this one, not as much as some of the other volumes, but it was still a pretty solid read. I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I read the BookstagramPride read-along pick, Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. With this book, I started to read it during the Queer Lit Readathon, and then I finished it during Read Your Gaze, so I counted it for both of them. You think that basically this is the perfect society, but some things end up happening, and she ends up awakening this creature and finding out that things are happening that aren't supposed to be happening within her city. The main character is a black trans girl who is selectively mute. There are also some side characters who are in a polyamorous relationship. There's a lot of really great stuff. The story as a whole, like even down to the setting, was just really engaging to me. As a reader, I am most interested in character and theme, and this absolutely had theme down. The whole reason that the city is there because of this huge revolution. They talk about things like defunding the police, and stuff like that just in passing. So that's kind of interesting all by itself. And then all of the different things that you learn, you know, them assuming that their city is 100% perfect. I think there are a lot of themes that you can take from that, especially considering the story's end. But I don't want to give anything away, so I won't talk about it kind of in full. But this was absolutely a 5-star read for me. Next, I read Transliberation by Leslie Feinberg. I talked about this book at length in another video, but this was just really beautiful. This was published in 1998, and it's a series of Leslie Feinberg speeches alongside a number of pieces that are written by other people. Some of them are folks who just came to listen to Leslie Feinberg speak, and some of them were writers or larger people within the movement, like Sylvia Rivera. There is just so much amazing stuff in here, and even though the language is sort of outdated because LGBT language evolves really quickly, but it has so much relevant stuff to say about solidarity, how we should be prioritizing liberation for all people. So basically, gay liberation necessitates trans liberation, and both of those also necessitates black liberation, and so on and so on. Z also mentions disability. He specifically mentions solidarity with the blind and deaf community, but also as he talks about her experience in the hospital being mistreated for being trans. Z actually had Lyme disease, I believe, which is why I put this with disability rep for one of the BookstagramPride prompts. Next, following very closely in line with Transliberation, we have Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Faid Menon. I have talked so many times about Alok on this channel. This is an Alok stan channel. I'm sorry if that's not what you came for. That's what it is now. I love them to death, and I love their poetry, and this book absolutely did not disappoint. I cried. My cats looked at me weird while I was crying. It was a whole thing. But I highly recommend this. In the beginning, they kind of talk about their own experience, which is really what hit me. Again, I have a video about this if you want a little bit more in depth. But then they also go in and bust kind of common misconceptions about trans people. So this works if you are just a person who is interested in the trans experience in general, kind of regardless of education level, but also if you're just starting off and you want to know more about gender, this is a really awesome place to start. The next book that I read was one of the NB Book Club picks for the month, and that is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. If you have not already heard about All Boys Aren't Blue, where have you been? I'll be putting a couple of reviews that are really wonderful in the description below. But this is basically a memoir of George M. Johnson's experience growing up Black and queer. On top of talking about gender and race and maybe some of the ways that you would expect, like with hardships and the like, this also focuses a lot on family, and kind of how their family reacted, maybe not in a way that you would automatically assume. They talk about how they did have other queer family members. The last section of the book is actually a series of letters to a number of their family members. And of course it made me cry. Of course, the beginning of the book also made me cry, and everything makes me cry. But that particular part was very, very touching. So I definitely recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. The only part that maybe fell a little bit weird for me was the bit talking about fraternities, but that honestly could have very well been a me thing. I will say though that there should be probably a trigger warning for cancer and talking about HIV, so if those sort of illnesses are kind of a problem for you, just prepare yourself before going in. Most of it's talked about in the later half of the book. So going back to fiction, the next book that I read was Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a magical realism book, and I don't think that I've read a whole lot of magical realism, but it was absolutely amazing. It focuses on this character, the Ada, who is born with gods inside of her. She also has dissociative identity disorder, partly because of the situation with gods being in her, but also mostly because of trauma that happens to her. So this goes from back and forth to different perspectives of the gods and personalities that live within her. This talks a lot about sexuality and gender and trauma. It was an amazing read. It was a very intense read. It's very literary in a lot of ways. This is a very unique book. I haven't read anything quite like it. However, I definitely felt the need to reread Breath I's Memory by Edwidge Dandakat. I also felt like there was other literature that I needed kind of to put in context with this to really get the most out of it. Am I the only person that ever gets like that? It's like, I like this book so much I need its whole lineage. I highly recommend this. It was absolutely a 5-star. I don't know why I waited until now to read Akwaeke Emezi, but clearly it's a great time. I'm looking forward to reading their newest book for the NB Book Club this month. I'm honestly not even sure what it's about, but I'm super stoked for it. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Felix Ever After, which I know everyone and their mom is reading Felix Ever After right now, and it absolutely deserves the hype that it's getting. This is a YA book focused on a trans boy who's in school. Some information gets leaked that he did not want other people to know, including his dead name. So a lot of the book revolves around him trying to figure out who did it. There's also a romance throughout the course of the story. There's actually technically a love triangle, which usually I despise. But this one was not done poorly. Honestly, I felt sort of attacked by it for personal reasons, just because the point of the love triangle wasn't to necessarily create plot, although there was plot inadvertently created, but it was actually to make a point about what it's like to actually accept the love that you deserve. So it was actually pretty beautiful, and it added to the story. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars, mostly because in the beginning I wasn't super engaged, like the whole revenge plot. At the very beginning I was almost thinking like this is gonna rely a little bit too heavy on miscommunication, but the more that I read the book, the more that I absolutely fell in love with it. This is one of those books that spoke to me in such an intense way, and I really wish that it would have existed when I was a teenager, or even like as an adult 5 years ago. I think it would have done me a lot of favors. But I highly recommend. It is on Scribd, so if you have a Scribd account, definitely listen to that. The next book that I got to was Restoried Selves, Autobiographies of Queer Asian Pacific American Activists. This is a book that I actually started last month, but I finished it up this month. This is not written by a trans person, or at least the main editor isn't trans, but there are some trans stories in this book. I really enjoyed hearing about so many different people's perspectives. This book has stories from so many different types of people and their experience of activism. Some of them talk about high school activism, some of them talk about in college or later. Some of them talk about their experiences with their family and how their culture impacted their coming out or impacted their queerness altogether. It was a really great read. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I technically finished July 1st, but I did start reading it and read like 3/4 of it in the month of June, so I'm going to talk about it, especially since I finished it now. That is Trans Power by Gino Roche. And this book wasn't exactly what I expected it to be. The bit on the back talks about empowerment and using language to empower yourself, and a lot of that was definitely in here. And a lot of what this says about empowerment in general is really important, but I was not expecting the emphasis on bodies and sex. That's not a bad thing, but I wasn't prepared for it, and so I don't think that I appreciated it in a way that I could if I had read it at a different time. So I don't think that I was able to appreciate it in the right way, but they do have some good discussion about what it's like to reclaim not just the word trans, but also words that pertain to people's bodies and things like that. However, the one, like, kind of not in my feels criticism that I have of this book is that it is kind of repetitive. The way that they have framed this, it's that, like, the introduction was just the author talking, and then between before and after each of the interviews, the author also does some talking about what's happening before the interview, and then doing a little bit of a wrap-up, which that should be fine, but it ended up being really repetitive. Like, you heard the same story like 4 or 5 different times. Like, I was tired of hearing about it by the middle of the book. Honestly, I think that I enjoyed the ending of this book better than the rest of it, because I think in the last chapter they do a really good job of wrapping all of this up, like the importance of trans empowerment and the importance of expanding our understanding of gender. They also talk about the implication that not only, you know, conservative people have on trans people, but also liberal feminists that are excluding trans people and putting out a lot of trans exclusionary rhetoric. They talk about having language on your own terms throughout the whole book, so I don't think that was missed at all. But I think that having the rest of the context that they talk about towards the end would have been really great to have during more of the book, especially instead of kind of repeating the same couple of stories over and over again. So I gave this 3 stars. I do think that it is a worthwhile read, but I do think that it is for very specific people. I think that if you're a cis person that doesn't know a whole lot about trans people, you'll want to skip out on this book until you get more educated, because this is just kind of more in-depth thinking about gender. So if you're not really used to bigger gender ideas, that's probably not the place for you. I think that if I weren't in as weird of a spot with myself as I am, that this would have been a better read. So those are all of the books that I finished. There are a number of books that I started. So first we have Nobody Passes, Rejecting the Roles of Gender and Conformity by Matilda Bernstein Sycamore. This is super interesting. This is an anthology, so each chapter or section is written by a different person. And this isn't just talking about, you know, queering the lines of gender, although that's absolutely there. You also have queering sexuality, queering the lines between sexuality and gender. There's also a lot of themes about people of color and disability. I plan on taking my time to get through this because I started to read it, and I don't know, there's just so much to unpack that I think I'm going to go a little bit slower with this, especially since there are so many different ideas coming from so many different sorts of people. The other book that I started was Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Now, this is not written by a trans person, but the readathon for this started on Juneteenth. Melanated Reader on Instagram put together a readathon, and I'll put her links in the description. This is a really great book so far. I am a bit behind for the readathon, but with what I've read so far, it looks like it's going to be a great read. Some of this, from what I can tell, is based around kind of some stuff that I've seen before just because I've studied race before. But there is stuff that's a little bit newer or that I just haven't seen really dug into a whole lot, particularly looking at religion. That's been an area that I've been interested to look into more in regards to race ideas. So those are all of the books that I read. There are 2 books that I did not get to that I just wanted to mention because y'all need to roast me if I don't finish them. And that is Gender Out Loud by Kate Bornstein. I really tried to read some of it, but I just didn't. I don't know why. I did technically read some Kate Bornstein because they are interviewed along with their partner in this book, in the Trans Power book, but I just didn't really get to this. So I plan on reading it hopefully next month. We'll see. Same goes for Moving Politics. I didn't even really touch it because I'm trash. I don't know. I'll get to it. I really will. It's not that I'm uninterested in either of them. Sometimes you just get those blocks. So hopefully I'll get through them in July. So that was my reading in the month of June. If you have read any of these books, definitely let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.